I'm Mackenzie Taylor, and I'm here with our senior editor, Drew White, who just had a conversation with Don Zimmerman. Tell us about it, Drew.
Yeah, I did. So obviously we're covering some of these House races very closely going into Battleground 2020. And this was the second candidate for House District 47 we've had on. Aaron Rice was the first, Don Zimmerman was the second. We talked about the race. We talked about sort of what animated him to get involved in politics. He's a former Austin City Councilman and earned a reputation on the Austin City Council as one of the sort of few limited government conservatives, and that didn't always sit well, right, with the Austin City Council. So it was a great conversation. It was good.
That's very, very cool.
Yeah.
Now, what should people do once they're done listening to this podcast?
Well, they should go to the Texan.news, Mackenzie, and they should subscribe.
They should pay for good news.
They should pay for good news.
I think that's a really good idea.
I do too.
I like it. Awesome. Well, thanks for listening today. We hope you enjoy.
Yeah. Thanks, y'all. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Texan podcast. My name is Drew White, senior editor here at the Texan, and this will be the third in our Battleground 2020 podcast series. We are happy to welcome former Austin City Councilman Don Zimmerman to the podcast. He is a candidate for House District 47 on the Republican side. And Mr. Zimmerman, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me here.
Yeah.
It's a
great.
pleasure.
So just for folks who may not be familiar, obviously this particular district, it used to be a Republican district. It flipped in 2018 under the, the Beto wave, one might call it. It's now represented by Vicki Goodwin, a freshman. And you've thrown your hat in the ring. There's four other candidates running on the Republican side of the aisle. But for folks who aren't familiar with your background as a former Austin City Council member, how did you get involved in this? You have kind of a long history in the political scene. What animates you to sort of throw your hat in the ring this go around?
Well, that's a great question. Let me first say I'm really excited about the HD 47 race. I'm happy with the candidates that have already stepped forward. They're all quality candidates. All of them will be much better than the socialist incumbent, Vicki Goodwin. But I do have to say that out of all the candidates that are stepping up and the ones that may come, I'm the only one who actually has a hat to throw into the ring. I thought I would mention that.
I'll ask you about that later. Yes.
We'll do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And actually, the history of the hat goes back to my wife has an aunt and an uncle that live in California, and they came here for a visit, and we were downtown across the street from the Driscoll. There's a little hat shop. So we just went in and we bought hats, and I started wearing it. And when I was on the campaign trail in 2014, it was sunny and hot. So I'm actually using this to not get sunburns. Yeah. And it's basically turned into a trademark hat. It's quite interesting. Yeah. But I've lived in the same place, same house in Northwest Travis County in Austin for 19 years. Wow. I moved here from Houston in the year 2000. Mm-hmm. I'm a fifth generation Texan from San Antonio on my mom's side. Yeah. And one of the things that drives me is when I was a little kid, I was a preschooler when my mom, who's in the Daughters of the Republic of Texas, she took me to the Alamo for the first time. I was born in downtown San Antonio. And she took me in there at 4 or 5 years old and explained how this is the cradle of Texas liberty because we had some brave volunteer troops that came in and tried to defend this against an overwhelming odds and a huge army. And they all lost their lives. They were all killed trying to defend liberty against huge odds. And that spooked me as a 4 or 5 year old. Yeah. So I started out in that kind of environment. My parents were Goldwater supporters in 1964 in Southeast San Antonio. Yeah. They were the only ones. Yeah. But that didn't stop my dad from putting a large sign on the top of our car. So I would have been 4 years old. And I'm like, who's this guy with gold hair and black rimmed glasses? And why are people staring at us when we drive down the street? Well, it's probably because no one else has any kind of a sign on their car of Barry Goldwater. Yeah. And we were the only ones. So I grew up being on the short side. I went to Texas A&M. Mm-hmm. They'll make all these Aggie jokes. And I know I have at least one competitor from there, but I have to say this. I have 2 engineering degrees, a bachelor's and a master's, which makes me certifiably half as smart as the average Aggie. So I've got a one up on them there. Gotcha. But I've had a high-tech career. I've done a lot of work in systems engineering. When I was in Houston, I worked on offshore oil rigs, cogeneration facilities, a lot of industrial controls, process controls, embedded systems, control systems that you never touch or feel. So I'm a very, very analytical systems engineering oriented person. So a lot of my nature of trying to cut to the chase which really annoyed the bureaucrats because they love to beat around the bush and hide the ball. And I'm always finding it for them, So some of that comes from my background, education and training.
Okay.
And I do understand life is actually very, very complicated. And part of what I have to do as a professional in my field of software systems engineering is boil things down to binary decisions. The homeless issue, for instance, it is a very, very complex issue because people are complex. But at the end of the day, you have a binary decision. Either you spend another $8 million of taxpayers' money to buy yet another homeless shelter, or you don't. Either you make the trespassing laws easier for the police to defend the people who are paying taxes and going about their business and being productive. You either make the rules and ordinances to defend them, or you defend the homeless who pay no taxes. So there's always a binary decision when you look at what's going on. So the people that are always, Zimmerman, it's too complicated. No, it's not too complicated. It's not. It doesn't mean it's easy to figure out, but you can figure it out, and you can find a principled basis for making these binary decisions. And I made a habit of that downtown.
So, I mean, your track record, you were one of, I think at the time, maybe the only conservative or one of only, I think Ellen Troxclair.
There were two and a half. Ellen Troxclair was definitely on the same team. And we had Sherry Gallo, who we would count maybe less than a half. I was being generous. But she started to turn a little bit in our direction. She voted in favor of the first budget, but we got her to vote against the second budget. So there were actually 3 votes against it.
What was that like?
There was only 1 vote the first time against it. But
what is that like, though, when you're on? I mean, this will be no secret to anyone, right? I mean, everybody knows Austin is very progressive, very heavy Democrat. What was that experience like, being on there and kind of being the sort of the loudest voice for restraining the local government? I mean, what was from the start to the end? You can read articles and, other news outlets that would call you a bomb thrower and this sort of stuff. But you were one of the sort of lone voices, other than, Ms. Troxclair, sort of saying, hey, maybe we should not do this a lot of the times.
Well, to be fair, I knew what I was getting into. I knew that it was not good down there. It's heavy on socialism and progressivism and Democratism, but I repeated myself. But I knew it was going to be tough. What they try to do largely is to marginalize, to mock, and to ridicule, to intimidate, to make false accusations. They really are sensitive to being called out. They really are very, very intolerant towards another point of view, especially if it's rational. So there's quite a bit of kind of quiet hostility is the way I would describe it. Actually, I describe my experience as serving 2 years on the second level of the Death Star, the downtown Death Star. Democrats call that City Hall.
Oh, I was a Star Wars fan. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, no, it gets better because I and my staff made it a point to never talk about the Force because it's always with them. And I had a couple of Jedi moves. Anytime I would see an Imperial Code Compliance trooper come in the building, I would slip in there and I'd say, "These are not the property taxpayers you're looking for." More than that, traffic congestion problems, which the Democrats are using. Maybe we can talk about that in a second. They have an agenda of new urbanism. But the mayor, curiously, lives across the street. I mean, literally across the street in the W Hotel. Now, what kind of sense does it make for a Democrat mayor of Austin to be living in the W? But he does. And I'm sure the reason is that all he has to do is cross one street and he's on the dark side. So it's a tough field down there. So I'm very excited about getting into the legislature with all the background I have, and I know how the city bureaucrats do their tricks. I know what they mean by local control. They are serious about controlling people. I argue that the city government's purpose was to defend local liberty, just like the state. And that the city government was there for water and wastewater infrastructure, maybe some utilities, some roads. Be nice to have those. But basically, they're supposed to be there to serve people on a local basis. But this is not what's going on. They see themselves as agents of change and basically little emperors and kings. They think they know better than everybody, and they're using their power to try to control people, not to serve them. That's got to change.
Can you give an example? I mean, we hear this a lot in Texas, right? Or at least in the Austin area, this sort of tension between local control and you just mentioned local liberty. What is for folks who are listening or watching, what is the difference between the two in your mind?
Well, like I just said, the municipalities are creatures of the state government.
Yeah.
So we have state and county government, and the state government creates the political subdivision of a municipality. I also served as an elected president of a municipal utility district, a MUD.
I knew that.
Which is another form of a smaller city government. So these are creatures of the state. And if you think about the purpose of government from our point of view as constitutional Republicans, the purpose of government was to defend our God-given rights and to provide for common infrastructure, common defense, things that help us in our pursuit of happiness. So I can guarantee you'll be a lot happier if you can get to work in your commute in an hour or 30 minutes instead of 2 hours a day. You know?
Yeah.
So these are things they could contribute. But in my view, there's a lot of politicizing. There are some Democrat unions, but again, I repeated myself. The government employee unions are really these powerful political machines that are using local government as tools to control people instead of to serve them. So you see a lot of that in the new urbanism push. And one of the things I would argue, and one of my purposes for going to the legislature, is really to tackle the traffic congestion issue. And people need to understand that local government, the county and the city, are actually standing in the way of getting freeway improvements, road expansions. They are actually agents of obstruction, and powerful agents of obstruction. They can collude with environmental groups, for instance, to try to file lawsuits at taxpayers' expense, claiming that the Barton Creek salamander is going to be damaged by a road improvement of SH 45 in the southwest part of the county. And you would ask yourself, well, okay, if you're an environmentalist, that's fine, but you don't have a right to use my tax dollars. And to use the environmental officer, the chief bureaucrat from the city of Austin, to pursue this political agenda to obstruct any kind of road expansion. And I believe from listening to Rob Spiller, the professional engineer, very intelligent, very smart guy, he knows how bad the traffic congestion is, more than we do. And he states, you can hear him on camera, on the record, saying that, well, what's needed is behavior change. And you ask yourself, so instead of defending our local liberty and providing for the infrastructure that we demand, you see your role as trying to control us and telling us we need to change our behaviors. We need to give up our private transportation, move downtown and get into a tiny condo on the 15th floor, maybe and ride a bus and a train to nowhere, or maybe a scooter or a bike or whatever. And again, I don't have anything against the new urbanist lifestyle. What I have a problem with is government coercion, and a lot of dishonesty that goes on down there.
So switching gears a little bit to the HD 47 race, we mentioned earlier, Vicki Goodwin is currently, representing that district. It's west of Austin. For those that don't know, it's sort of goes up sort of northwest as well. If you look at sort of the district map, and it's been a traditional sort of Republican district for a long time prior to 2018. When you looked at this particular district, when you were making the decision to throw your hat in the ring or not, what about it to you says Republicans can win this seat back in terms of the fundamentals of the district? Well,
certainly the fact that a number of Republicans at the top of the ticket, the governor and lieutenant governor and others, were able to win. But I don't really consider it. When you say a district is Republican or Democrat, I would qualify that by saying that it leans Republican, not that it's Republican. Because if it were a Republican district, we would still have Paul Workman as our state rep. And I would like to back up a little bit, though, too. I was here in 2000. We had redistricting, of course. And in 2002, we actually had 3 Republican legislators in the western part of the county. We had Terry Keel in the southwest part in 47. We had Todd Baxter, who had been a MUD, I think he was a MUD director for the River Place MUD, which is not far from my Canyon Creek MUD. And then we had Jack Stick in House District 50. So we started off actually with 3 Republicans. So the issue of the metropolitan area becoming more Democrat and more socialist has been a serious problem. And it's not just in the Austin area.
No.
It's all over Texas. And you could argue it's all over the nation. I think it's very instructive to look at those presidential map that shows these little tiny blue dots of a handful of metro counties that are largely socialist, and then thousands and thousands of counties that are red and still conservative and Republican. It's very, very, Very interesting.
Yeah.
After serving in the Austin city government, I would say this is largely due to policies. The municipal governments are doing things. They're politically shrewd, and they are in the business of expanding government employees, expanding unions, expanding the size of the monopoly government schools, so they can expand the number of government workers and government union members and Democrat donors and voters. There's no rocket science here.
Yeah.
So I think people need to really wake up and figure out what's going on. So yes, I do think 47 is winnable. I think the way that a down ballot candidate would win, like in state rep, when you're not at the top of the ticket, it puts an extra burden on you personally as a candidate to knock on that many more thousands of doors and make personal connections to voters.
Yeah.
It is the way you cut through the slander of the newspaper. It's the way you cut through all kinds of political propaganda is simply by one-on-one communication.
Yeah.
And it is very laborious. It's extremely time-consuming. I can't talk to 175,000 people myself, so I have to have finances to hire additional helpers. I like to go block walking with hired help.
Yeah.
So I'll go down one side of the street and I'll have a helper going down the other side.
Yeah.
It's very, very effective, but you have to make those personal connections to get voters to remember you and vote for you on the ballot.
Yeah. And just out of curiosity, I don't know if you know this or not, but is your name ID still very high in this area? I would assume it's probably one of the higher ones, at least in terms of the field, but I may be wrong on that.
I think it depends on, of course, who you poll and how you do polling, but I think it's possible that my name ID is higher than the incumbent Democrat.
Okay.
Not to mention higher than my other Republican competitors, because they just haven't had the experience in the background.
Sure.
In fact, I guess at this point, after having won 2 elections, one of my staffers, retired Army warrant officer Tim Kelly, he worked on my campaign and in my city council staff. He has now been elected to the Cedar Park City Council. So now the people that have worked with me are also being elected. So that's how far ahead I am on the issue of experience.
Sure. And we'll get into the field here in just a second, but I just want to kind of ask a question for, our audience's sake and just for people who are listening. So when you describe sort of the socialism that you're speaking of in the urban areas and, the socialist Democrats, can you explain and define why, as you're talking about them, you see it as socialism? Obviously, we have nationally some of these younger, new Democrats, Ocasio-Cortez, right? Ilhan Omar, that are self-described socialists, right? Senator Sanders is a self-described socialist running on the Democrat side of the ticket. Why do you characterize sort of the state capital Democrats, or at least some of them, as socialists when you're looking at their policies or their views?
I think the lion's share of the blame of the push towards socialism in our country is coming from the monopoly government school system. Sorry, but that's just a fact. I'm 59 years old at this point, so I was a kid in the 60s in school, and we still had Christmas parties.
Yeah.
I can still remember as an elementary school student in Southeast San Antonio, one of the most fun times of the year, right around December before we were let out, is the kids would all walk around the different school classrooms, and we would look at the Christmas decorations in other classrooms.
Yeah.
And it's amazing the transformation just in my lifetime from a country that largely acknowledged God's providence as George Washington did. He mentioned how important the hand of providence was in beating the world's greatest superpower.
Yeah.
You don't do that without the blessing of God.
Yeah.
So he acknowledged that publicly, and we used to largely do that back in the 60s.
Sure.
Now the monopoly government school has such a stranglehold of control and such a radical extremist agenda that they consider it illegal to have a Bible or a Christmas party in school. But at the same time, kids are being coerced and intimidated and bullied to go out to homosexual pride parades. So we've had you talk about a dramatic cultural shift.
Yeah.
And I can connect these dots between a God-fearing free republic and a socialist democracy that worships the rule of the mob.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And so I'm in the business of connecting dots. I mentioned that as my systems engineering background, but all day long, I have to connect dots. Why are things happening? And seeing the things that have happened now, what's coming next?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've been doing that for 30 years in my
Yeah.
professional business. I can't help it. I have to connect dots.
Yeah.
So this idea of a socialist humanist mentality, the idea that there is no God, there's no objective truth, therefore, all problems must be solved by almighty government, because there is no almighty God.
Yeah.
You know, I think I make a joke about the socialists. If you look at their policies and what they do, they're based their entire political ideology on violating 2 of the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not envy the top 2%, and thou shalt not steal aren't paying their fair share.
Yeah.
So I think we have a serious problem here.
Yeah.
And my job as a candidate in House District 47 is to make the case that our nation is being very badly divided deliberately by socialists, by people who want to replace the rule of law with the rule of the mob. But my approach is going to be pragmatic in terms of, say, traffic congestion issues.
Sure.
And I can tie traffic congestion issues back to socialism, humanism, almighty government and control of all things, ruling your life, telling you where you have to live, what you can't drive, how you have to get around. All these things, all these dots are connected.
Yeah. So looking at the field, we had Aaron Wrights on our podcast as well, who's also running the primary, I guess against you, right? So y'all are all competing against one another. You've mentioned a couple of times sort of what you believe sets you apart, but as you're moving into this in the very early stages, what do you believe, you know, whether it's your background experience, what do you believe sets you apart from the rest of the field, which you said you think's a good field, and you know, obviously you believe that anybody would be better than the current occupant, you know, Representative Goodwin. What is it that, you know, you believe will carry you over the top at the end of the day?
Well, obviously the experience I have from running many campaigns, a lot of experience talking with media. I guess the success I've had, I sued the city of Austin for illegal taxation back in 2002. It's interesting. When I ran for office and won my first race, I kind of sized up our situation in our neighborhood and said, you know, we're being deceived. We're being misled by city bureaucracy. You know, they're dealing with us dishonestly, in my opinion. And we've had a lot of nice people, a lot of professional diplomatic types. All of that has been fruitless.
Sure.
It's time to file suit. It's time to get serious. It's time for a different approach. And that's what I bring. I bring a more hardcore approach. I bring more realism, I think, to the situation. I see an urgency in our situation that I don't think some of the other candidates do, owing from the depth of the experience that I have.
Yeah.
There's one interesting thing about the field we have here, and I'm really excited about, and I agree with the other candidates that 47 is winnable, and that's why it's attracting a lot of good candidates, and I think there will be more. There's been a debate about, well, you know, there's too many candidates in HD 47. We need to narrow the field. No, we don't. I'd like to see the field broaden. Look at what's happening on the presidential stage. We now have 24 clowns, Democrats, that are all attacking President Trump. And the advantage of having 24 simultaneous attacks is each one of them can get some separate airtime and some earned media to bash the president. So if you look at the wisdom of this and apply it to 47, we could have a dozen candidates all talking about what a terrible record the incumbent has and why she should be replaced, and what the strengths are for each of our candidates and how they would approach the job and what their priorities should be. So there could be more discussion, more earned media, more attention on the race. So that can all be a positive thing. So I'm asking for more candidates, not fewer. If you have a conviction that you should run and you think you have a good message, come on in and join the fray. The more the merrier. I'm not running against any of my opponents. I'm only running against Vicki Goodwin because she's a socialist.
So this past session obviously just came to an end. 30,000 foot view from your perspective. Was it successful? Was it unsuccessful? Was it somewhere in the middle? Obviously, a lot of the sort of grassroots conservatives were pretty frustrated, right, with sort of the policy outcomes, whether it was on the life issue or the spending issue. Where do you stand looking at this past session?
Well, we have this every 2 years. Every 2 years when the session ends, the people like me that really want our Republican platform to be followed, because we are Republicans, we're in the majority. I've been to every state convention for 22 years. I don't know if you knew that, but
No, I had no
I've
idea.
never missed a convention
Yeah.
in 22 years. And I remember back in 1996, people complaining about Kay Bailey Hutchison, that she was kind of soft on the pro-life issue, which she was, and there was a big argument about what do we do with Kay Bailey Hutchison? She's not holding up the pro-life part of our platform. So these arguments have been going on for decades. So count me among those who are frustrated that we can't accomplish more. Let's put it this way. If Vicki Goodwin as a socialist is rated as, say, the 7th worst or the 7th most Democrat or the most socialist legislator, I'd like to be at least the 7th best and most conservative legislator. So that's the direction I'd like to go. I think my biggest disappointment in the session was not getting the ban on taxpayer-funded lobbyists.
Yeah.
That one to me is the most outrageous as to why that could not get passed.
Yeah,
But-
Representative Middleton's bill. Yeah.
Oh my
which we
gosh, I
covered.
just talk about frustration. But again, here's another interesting thing I'd like to say to your viewers and something for us to all consider. As someone who's been elected, I know how difficult it is to get through a campaign, to raise the money, to knock on the doors, to get your message out and to win. It is tough to win.
Yeah.
And so when you're disappointed at the elected officials not coming through and delivering for you, what I would say is go run for office. Seriously. You may win, and if you don't, you'll find out how hard it is, and that'll give you some more perspective as to why these people don't respond to you the way they want. You know, it's so difficult to get in there. A lot of them are afraid of losing.
Yeah.
That's a fear I've never had. I think if I win HD 47 that I'll stay and get reelected, but I lost my reelection for the city council, of course, in District 6, but it's more important to stay true to your principles, to be honest with people, to follow through on your promises and commitments, and let the chips fall where they will. So that's what I'm going to bring, an uncompromising position to HD 47. Look, we have only one chance to elect a Republican from Travis County. So that Republican's going to have to be good enough to represent the entire county, because you only have one person to go to.
Sure.
I had that trouble on city council. You know, they would come to me because they say, well, my Democrat council member won't do anything for me.
Yeah.
So I'm calling you. So we had a lot of people like that we helped.
Yeah. So from a policy perspective, you've mentioned traffic congestion, trying to make improvements there from a limited government perspective on this issue. What else would you say that you would comprise your platform, so to speak, to sort of separate you or maybe even align you with some of the other candidates that are running in the race?
Well, the Republican platform is a very good place to say what your priorities are. So whatever the state convention decides, every 2 years they come up with legislative priorities, and there'll be a handful of those. So those are going to be my priorities.
Yeah.
Whatever the convention decides and whatever the Republican voters say, that should be your priority. But let me mention one other thing quickly. Drop that on the floor. Here's some other things. Being on the city council really opened my eyes to the problems in local government. And I don't think your viewers know, but I'm going to read this quickly, something I discovered when I was on council.
Sure.
This is section 2-8-1 of the City of Austin Charter. That's the main, kind of like the constitution of the city. It says, and I'm quoting, city services provided regardless of immigration status. Quote, services funded by funds appropriated by the council shall be provided without regard to a recipient's immigration status. That is a very, very clear statement that the city bureaucrats intend to give your tax dollars to illegal immigrants, and they are doing it, but they're flagrantly doing it.
Yeah.
And it's this kind of issue that, as a state representative, I can go after some of the illegal things that Austin is doing, bring them to light, get congressional investigations, because I think this deserves a congressional investigation. And the visibility of a state rep seat would allow me to do that. This is United States Code Chapter 1324, which some people may have heard of, that talks about the felony criminal offenses for knowingly aiding, abetting, and concealing or harboring. Doesn't that sound like a sanctuary city?
Yes.
Sanctuary cities aren't just a bad idea.
Sure.
They're a violation of federal law.
Sure.
So there's a lot of work I can do in this field. So the short answer to my policy positions, pay attention to what the state conventions are telling us to do. Like, get rid of taxpayer funding for lobbyists, because that is an absolute outrage. That's a good one. I'll go after that.
Sure.
But there are some other things that I learned from personal experience working with local government that I intend to go after as well.
So on that particular provision, it sounds vague enough to where it would encompass kind of a broad swath of things. Is that mainly talking about utility services, or is that including everything from, potential taxpayer like benefits to everyone? I mean, that for our audience, when you read that, and that's in the Austin, basically the statute here in Austin City, what all in your mind is that encompassing? I mean, that's
an excellent question.
Yeah.
Let me briefly explain the shell
please.
game.
Absolutely, please.
Because it is a shell game.
Sure.
So every budget cycle, there are billions of dollars of your money, right, being spent by the city.
Sure.
So on occasion, we get to dig in. The council gets some visibility of that budget process, not nearly enough, but we get some. And we'll see, for instance, I'll go through and scrutinize $1 million that's going to the Catholic charities. Some kind of non-governmental organization, a 501c3 or maybe a C4. The way the city government violates the law is they take a grant, a block of money, say $1 million, and they throw it over a fence of a 501c3. And now what's interesting about that is state law says that the city is responsible for accounting for the money that's been spent. That is state law.
Yeah.
But what the bureaucrats do in the budget cycle is take, say, $1 million, throw it over the fence, maybe to, say, Catholic Charities, for instance. Catholic Charities will take the money, and they'll throw it over another fence to another 501c3. And that 501c3 may take the money and then distribute it to yet another 501c3. So you see, it's money laundering, and there's really no way to follow where all that money is gone. The city is responsible for accounting for it, but they simply don't. When you ask for the information, they say, truthfully, that they don't have it, because they don't. But they're obligated to have it, but they don't. Who's going to hold them accountable for throwing your money over the fence and having these other organizations spend it on legal services for illegal aliens to help them to not be, caught and interrogated by the police or by ICE agents? This is the way the shell game is being played.
Yeah.
And you don't know that unless you've had the visibility of being on the inside of Austin government. There's some other interesting stuff that happens behind closed doors in executive session.
Sure.
Where they don't want you to say anything and the TV cameras aren't allowed.
Sure.
I've got some other ideas I can go after them on stuff that's happened there as well. And a final point on this, anybody remember the wood chip burning plant out in Northeast Texas?
Vaguely.
Yeah. So I am the only council member who ever saw the contract for that $2 billion wood chip electricity providing plant. I'm also the only person who ever toured the plant. I actually went on a plant tour because I used to work in industrial controls in these kind of facilities.
Sure.
And it's a terrific plant, but it never runs because it can't produce electricity profitably, so it sits there idle.
Yeah.
And it was a big swindle to the Austin Energy taxpayers. It cost them, it started out at $50 million. What people don't know, because I read the contract and no one else had it, is that it incremented the payments that we owed on a plant that produced no energy every year. So we had about $1 billion of payments owed on that plant when it produced no energy.
Wow.
So I did a lot of investigation on that.
Yeah.
As a council member, I spent some of my council budget hiring a registered professional engineer who's a specialist in the utility business, because I don't have a specialty in that.
Sure.
So we got people to look at it. We went through it and scrubbed it. I did some investigation. I was looking for some kind of criminal activity, some kind of kickback, and all I could find was government incompetence. Just unbelievable government incompetence. And going back to ideology and why socialism and humanism ties into all this, the person that pushed this through had a psychology degree, knows absolutely nothing about the power production business, and he hadn't read the contract either that committed us to $1 billion for no energy. And they did it because they're afraid that the sky is falling. So Chicken Little had convinced them that because of CO2, the sky is going to fall and the earth is going to be destroyed. So because of Chicken Little, we got sucked into this terrible deal. But the Austin City Council under Mayor Leffingwell voted unanimously to approve it, and none of them read the contract.
Wow.
That kind of stuff has to change.
Sure.
And to be honest with you, I'm the kind of individual that'll put a stop to it.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't have the moxie. They don't have the abrasion. They don't have the courage to face false accusation. They call me a bomb thrower. Okay, so if I get the contract to $1 billion boondoggle and study it and start asking questions, they call that throwing a bomb.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we know the media game.
Media games.
Yes, it's very much, there's a reason, right, why fake news sort of resonates with a significant portion of the American public. There's no doubt that that has probably been an earned title from time to time, for sure. So looking at this, listening to what you're talking about, looking ahead to the next session. So let's fast forward. Let's say you win the nomination. You go up against Representative Goodwin and you win, and you go into the 2021 legislative session. What do you believe is going to be the priorities for what we're doing? So from a public policy perspective, one of the things we heard from not just folks outside the legislature, but even some folks in the legislature, is that the property tax efforts, and I know you're familiar with this on your time in city council, the property tax efforts to cap the sort of rate of increase, they're not going to result in an effective cut, right, in your overall property tax payments. Do you believe, that's going to be an issue in 2021 for Republicans who, spend a lot of elbow grease, right, to pass a property tax reform that doesn't effectively cut? Is that going to be something that pops up? And if not, what are you looking at that you think is going to be a priority?
It is. It's a great question. But remember, before anything else happens, the first thing that has to happen is our Republican majority, presuming we still have one, and I think we will, we have to follow the state convention delegates' demand that we have a Republican caucus to elect the speaker.
Yeah.
This is a critical area because if we don't have better leadership and more conservative leadership like we had in the Senate. If you remember from the last session, the Senate was really the champions. Paul Betancourt, fantastic senator. They were at the cutting edge of pushing the fiscally conservative agenda forward. The House was lagging behind. So I think we need more aggressive, fiscally conservative leadership in the House. So we have to start there.
So would you not support Speaker Bonin?
What I support is a caucus to elect the speaker. What I am vehemently opposed to, and I'm waiting for this to come out because it probably will, are these pledge cards where the incumbent power demands that you sign this pledge card that you're going to support the incumbent or else. And the or else means they're going to spend money to try to defeat you.
Sure.
That kind of stuff has got to stop.
Sure.
I mean, if we have a Republican caucus and we reelect Speaker Bonin, that will be fine with me. We just need to follow the rules of what the state convention and the party
a robust debate, in other words.
Yeah, we have a robust debate and do
Sure.
it. So once we do that, going back to your question of the problem of property taxes, the biggest offender of property taxes is the monopoly government school. And I joke with people, only half jokingly, that trying to satisfy the monopoly government school with more taxes is like trying to satisfy the Bastrop wildfire with more trees. It's impossible to do.
Yeah.
So we have got to get back to the discussion of reform of education in terms of school choice. And I don't know what kind of school choice we want. The school choice that HD 47 might want would look very different from downtown Houston.
Sure.
Or very different from what you might want out in the rural area, in the rural districts. So I think the issue of school choice, the way to get efficiency is to get choices. The way to get your cost lowered in education is through choice and through competition. We all know that as fiscal conservatives.
Yeah.
The absolute worst thing you can do is feed a government monopoly.
Yeah.
That's the worst possible thing. And costs are only going to go up and up and up. So we have to get back to a discussion about some kind of meaningful school choice. Yeah. And I don't know what that looks like because, as I said, it's very different depending on what district you're in.
Yeah. Yeah. So from an electorate perspective, 2020, obviously it's going to be a presidential election year. Do you think that works in your favor with, the president at the top of the ballot? Obviously straight ticket voting is now gone in Texas, but does that work in your favor? Does it not have any impact whatsoever? How does that sort of play out?
Let me start with some funny, tragic comedy of what they did to me in 2016. The city government unions put out a bunch of attack mail pieces, and they had my photo with the hat, and they have Donald Trump next to me, and the big, bold, nasty headline says, "Don Zimmerman is the Donald Trump of Austin." It's hilarious because this is the way half-truths work, right? I'm not a New York billionaire, but I do have a very attractive and intelligent younger wife who speaks more than one language. So half-truths will kill you in campaigning.
Sure.
So sure, they tried to tie me to Trump, and they used the hate machine against Donald Trump in 2016 to very good effect. My opponent put his photo on Hillary Clinton's push cards. So even though it's a nonpartisan race, you had Hillary Clinton on one side and then my city council opponent on the other side.
Wow, I did not know that.
That's the way they knocked me out. They simply said, if you hate Donald Trump, then you hate that guy. If you like Hillary Clinton, then you like that guy.
Yeah.
And that was the election. That's it.
Yeah.
It's not policy debate. It's not your record. That's really what elections can sometimes boil down to. And the thing I would do over again, and what I'm going to do very differently in 47, is to focus more on putting resources towards individual voter contacts, because that's how you get past that.
Yeah.
If somebody hands you a flyer and it's got Joe Biden on it on one side and my opponent on the other, what counts for far more than that is if I had a chance to meet that individual face to face and personally ask for their vote and say, you know what, I'm a mechanical engineer from Texas A&M. I know how to solve problems like traffic congestion. A vote for me is a vote for a new freeway loop around Western Travis County that'll cut your commute by 20 minutes a day.
Yeah.
I need your vote.
Yeah.
That's how you win.
Well, we were going to be obviously following this race very closely. We're trying to get all the candidates on. Representative Goodwin, we hope to have on as well, talk with her about her first sort of session and what it means to be, a Democrat in a seat that was previously held by a Republican for a while. And we will be tracking this as one of our sort of integral battleground districts going forward. Switching gears, sort of the last question, a totally non-political question. We have asked this several times, and we've gotten many different answers, but I'm gonna ask you this. So we have theoretically had a conversation. If there were a superhero called Captain Texan, not Captain America, who do you believe should play this superhero?
That's a question I'm not prepared for. Why don't you dig into what you're trying to get to out of that?
It just really looks like we've had, and unfortunately our CEO said Matthew McConaughey, which, is what it is. And then we had Aaron Wrights was asked this question, and he said, although he didn't remember the name, none of us did, but basically Sam Elliott. He's got kind of the sort of the Texas sort of vibe going on with that.
If we back up to the 70s, when I first got an inkling that maybe I had a political future, that I had some passion for this, and I thought there was some chance I could get in and do some good, it would be Dr. Ron Paul. I remember back in the 70s when Ron Paul first won his seat in Congress, reading some articles. They didn't have the internet back then, but newspapers and magazines. And I just, Dr. Ron Paul, who is this guy? And I would read something that he would say, and I noticed even as a teenager in high school, this guy says more in 10 seconds than the average politician says in 10 hours. What's up with this guy? Who is Dr. Ron Paul? Back in 2000, I met with him personally, and I was affiliated with him for many years. I talked to him on his cell phone just a couple weeks ago. Told him I was running for HD 47.
Yeah.
So we still maintain a relationship, but I think his brand of intellect, of being informed on issues, of having a lot of integrity and courage, even though Dr. Paul is from Pennsylvania, I would adopt him as a native Texan, and I'm like, that's my guy.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. This has been great. We've enjoyed having this conversation. For those of you guys that have, either tuned in or you're watching, we appreciate you as always, and we will see you all next time.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all for listening. If you've been enjoying our podcast, it would be awesome if you would review us on iTunes. And if there's a guest you'd love to hear on our show, give us a shout out on Twitter. Tweet @TheTexanNews. We're proud to have you standing with us as we seek to provide real journalism in an age of disinformation. We're paid for exclusively by readers like you, so it's important we all do our part to support The Texan by subscribing and telling your friends about us. God bless you, and God bless Texas.